Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on the role of the Assistive Technology Technologist in FE. My name is Kirsten Jones and I'm NatSpec's Policy Officer for Wales. Today will be led by Fil McIntyre from NatSpec's TechAbility service along with Kim Lawther, Head of Assistive Technology at Bridgend College. You will have the opportunity to ask some questions later, and if you could use the chat function to do that, please. So I hope that you find what Fil and Kim have to say to us today useful for you in your work. And so without further ado, pass you over to Fil. Thank you.
So Kim is just going to talk us through her role at Bridgend and day-to-day.
Hey everyone. My name's Kim Lawther. I'm the Assistive Technology lead at Bridgend College. I've been there since August 2019. It's a relatively new role. So previously to my role, there were things that covered assistive tech, but there wasn't anybody specifically for assistive technology. So this is our team. So we've got the head of ALN at the top, and then we've got 3 ALN transition leads. We've got 2 SPLD coordinators. We've got 1 ASD lead and 1 assistive tech lead, which is myself. So first of all, I want to talk about that sort of team dynamic. So here we've got a really nice diagram which places the learner in the centre. And then there's myself, which is the sort of go-between with the transition lead, SPLD, ASD, tutors and parents/carers on the outskirts. So I think it's a really nice diagram, which I can't take credit for. It does exist out there. But it's a really nice diagram which sort of shows how important the assistive technology lead is within FE or schools, wherever really, because ultimately all of those people are around there to try and support the learner to achieve whatever their goal is. And often the thing that will plug any difficulties or any gaps is assistive technology. And it's important to notice the other ones on the side as well. You know, I'd say that diagram is what primarily on a day-to-day basis is the team that works around the learner in my role, but also it's important, you know, speech and language therapists sometimes, well-being. We've got Lawther, which is our careers hub. So I'll talk a little bit later on about careers and placements and looking at that. But yes, so there's lots of people that an assistive technologist has to work with to help learners achieve their goals. So talking about our learners at Bridgend, we have, and I work with primarily high incidence disabilities, so things like autism, dyslexia, emotional and behavioural disorders. They're sort of the very much day-to-day, but we do also have low incidence disabilities, so learners with visual impairments, hearing impairments, and at Bridgend College, I'm not sure if any of you know, but we have Western House, which is a specialist residential home. And a lot of our Western House residents also are at Bridgend College, so they do independent living skills mainly. So then we do have learners with cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injuries and Down syndrome. So where we're a little bit different from general FEs is that we do sort of cater for learners with more low incidence disabilities. So looking at how assistive technology works within general FE, this is the sort of timeline that I work with. So as you can see, information gathering, assessment, support, review and assessment again then. So I'll go a little bit into more detail about those. So information gathering is the first and most important part for an assistive tech lead or assistive tech. So in my role, my very first thing to do is I liaise with the transition team. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 transition leads. They all cover different curriculum areas and are also spread across our different campuses. So they'll get loads of information during that transition period before they come to college and when they're leaving school. So all of that information will be passed on to me, and I can see anything they've used previously, any difficulties they've had previously, because not every school will have an assistive technology provision, so they may not have ever had anything. So you'll see that in the difficulty sort of section. So all of that information is super important for me. We also talk to the learners and the parents about what they use. So even down to something as simple as, have you used a laptop before? Do you use a laptop? Are you more comfortable with a tablet? Are you more comfortable on your phone? What systems have you used before? Because we are a Google college, so everything will be Google from the day that they start with us. So if they've only ever used Microsoft, I have to take that into consideration, that I'll have to link up with the digital team and make sure that their digital literacy runs alongside my assistive technology provision. And again, about difficulty, so anything that they've had trouble with before, and alongside my sort of information gathering, there'll be, if they've got autism, the ASD lead will have a lot to do with them, so I will liaise with them, and same with the SPLD. So if they are dyslexic, I'll speak to them about what their plans are. We also do offer school visits. More often than not, it's if they have a high assistive technology usage already. So I will go to their school and speak to assistive technology leads there. And we also run a summer transition programme. So during that, I will go down and partake in sort of activities, and those that have been flagged up for potentially needing assistive tech, I'll sort of keep more of an eye on and see how and what they use. And then obviously we have individual support plans which are put in place in sort of September, and then they're updated throughout the year with any changes. So all of that information gathering stage in the summer transition up until September, October, November will all be placed into their individual support plan, and then everybody who has anything to do with that particular learner will have access to that. So then going through to assessment, all of that information I've gathered is obviously super important for assessment. So that will inform how I will assess. So I have a generic AT form, which is very much a tick box, kind of, can they do this? Do they do that? Do they need this? What have they used before? What haven't they used? So that's on Google Forms. So obviously if you're on Microsoft, you can use Microsoft Forms. And then obviously all the data and everything like that is super important for the rest of the year then for me. For more complex learners, so for example, the low incidence, so visual impairment, hearing impairment, cerebral palsy, things like that, I have the generic assessment, but then I have a much more sort of rigorous assessment based on whether it is visual impairment, hearing impairment. And so I go through all of that with the learner one-to-one. So we go through all of my tick box exercises, any equipment that I've thought through the information gathering, and also during the assessment I have my own office and my own computer suite, so I'm very lucky in that sense that if something hadn't been flagged up during information gathering, it's literally there and I can just quickly grab it to try it out. So that is essentially what we do. We'll have a one-to-one with an LSA if necessary, or even a parent, guardian, so that we can try a few different things out. I have enough time with them to let them try it out and then see if they are confident in what I've given them, or if it's, if it's not suitable, we'll try something else and very much do that. So you want to make sure you have plenty of time and it's not a rushed exercise, because you then don't want to sort of send them off all very flustered and not knowing what's going on. So we do that. We have a nice assessment. I'll always write up sort of guides on how to use it for anybody who's supporting that learner, whether it be an LSA or a tutor or even at home, a parent or guardian. So that's the assessment part. And then going on from there is the support. So once I've sent them off with what I think will be suitable for them and will help them during their studies at Bridgend College. We offer regular sessions until they feel confident enough. So that could literally be one session if you've got a student who feels very confident and happy, or it can be weekly sessions up until the point where they say, I feel confident with this now and I don't need your help. I like to make sure that the learners feel as though that they can come back to me, or if they can drop me an email anytime and say, oh, this isn't really working anymore. So I think it's really important to have that relationship with your learner, that they feel confident enough to come back to you, and not feel like that they can't because you've said this will help and it hasn't helped, so how can I go back to them? It's always really important at the end of support or assessment to be like, look, this is all about you. And this is what I think will help, but if it doesn't help, tell me, because there's 100 other options. And support as well for the learning support assistants, the tutors, anybody, going back to that graph, anybody surrounding that learner. It's about supporting them as well, which ultimately makes your job easier as well. If everybody feels confident within it, you might not get as many sort of callbacks, people coming back time and time again because they don't get it, or because the learning support can't support them appropriately. So it's really important to speak to your management and take that time during CPD days to debust the myths that technology is really difficult. We've got some amazing LSAs at Bridgend College, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying they do span age-wise. So you tend to find the younger LSAs feel really confident with tech, and the older ones not so much. But amazing, our LSAs who are older are so keen to be on board, and we run Google Level 1 and Level 2 for anybody who wants it in the college. So I would really recommend spending time with the management and saying, look, it's so valuable that if our LSAs are up with their digital literacy, that life's going to be much easier for everybody involved. So that includes assistive technology. Like I say, we're a Google college, so we do a lot on Chrome extensions and what can help with that. But Windows is full of accessibility, so having those days where you look specifically at that, I would thoroughly recommend that. And then review. This can vary. This can be week to week. This can be month to month. This can be year to year. It really does depend on the learner itself. But it's important to keep in touch, not just with the learner, but the team that surrounds that learner. So has anything changed with their condition? Is always something that's really important to keep on top of. Also, for general FE, a lot of the time your learners will be on placement. So again, that's super important, because the assistive tech that you provide on campus may have to be adapted or even completely changed within a placement setting. So it's important to keep on top of what your learners are doing within that academic year. And then checking in and asking how they feel about it. Like I say, it's important to have that rapport with your learners to know that they feel confident enough to come back to you, or even shoot you an email, whichever they prefer. Because at the end of the day, it's them that it affects. So they might go away with all your recommendations, but if it doesn't work, then that's no use for them and no use for you. You've not done what you meant to do. So having that check-in, making sure they're happy with how it works. If they're not happy, trying something else. And again, speaking to the team around your learner, they might not want to admit that it's not working, but the tutor might say, look, you've given this in September and nothing's changed, or December and nothing's changed. Can we re-look at something else? So now I'm going to have a look at some learner examples. They're just sort of generic learner examples. So this is a learner with a visual impairment. So through information gathering at the beginning of the year, they didn't attend the transition programme. So they started in September, and I was able to liaise with the transition team and get as much information from them. So that came from parents and previous school. And then I was able to also speak with the learner as well, because the learner was super tech savvy, and I actually got more accurate and relevant information straight from the learner. So I was able to get a list of all the equipment that they'd used previously and all the equipment that they were currently using. So that was really good information. Google is brilliant. It is brilliant, but for the more complex low incidence disabilities, it's not that great. So it was really important to know all of that information from the go, because that meant that I had to source a Windows laptop, because we have Chromebooks primarily. We do have the odd few Windows, but we are Chrome. So Chromebooks, if you're not aware, you can't install external software. So that's why I talk a lot about extensions. So Windows we had to get for a screen reader, essentially. I supported the learner with weekly drop-in sessions. Now, these were different because this learner was very competent with their assistive technology. It wasn't as necessary to be as involved, so I made those weekly sessions optional. You know, I'd always be there at that time, and if they came with any issues, that was fine. If they didn't come, I would just assume they were okay, but I'd drop them an email anyway. And supported the LSA team because this tech is very different from anything they've used before. So again, it comes down to that training, those CPD days, and making sure as well tutors were fully aware of how to make their resources that they provided the learner with as accessible as possible. So it wasn't just a screen reader, it was also a braille note machine. So they had to ensure that their resources were accessible, and in order to do that they needed a little bit of input from me. So then the last learner example is a learner who had dyslexia, but it wasn't flagged up before they came to college, so which is quite common. So they were flagged up to me in the November after starting in the September by the SPLD team, and they were flagged up during a weekly meeting that we have. And I used a lot of information that the SPLD team already had done. So they'd done their assessment and already put things in place, but they asked for my input in terms of technology, because obviously the majority of education now is very digital. So I had that one-to-one assessment with the learner. I had a chat with the learner. I'd used the information I'd already gathered to put together a few different pieces for them to try. There was nothing hardware for this learner. It was all Chrome extensions. So this is what I'm saying. Chrome is fab, just not for sort of the more complex side of things. So we put in place an overlay, a coloured overlay, speech to text, Mercury Reader, which removes adverts and distractions from web pages, set up open dyslexic font, and sorted out read aloud so they could select the text and it would be read back to them. So during that assessment, we set all that up on her Google profile. So wherever she logs on, that'll always be there, and she'll never have to sort of redo it, which is a fab feature for Chrome, and Windows also offer that feature. And then just kept up to date with the learner, sort of checked in for the next sort of 2-3 weeks to ensure that they felt confident with what had been set up, and also checked back in with the SPLD team to make sure that they were, well, first of all, they knew exactly what I'd done, what I'd recommended and what I'd set up, so that they could then incorporate that into their sessions, which they continue to have with the learner. So that is a really condensed and quick summary of my role. I know we're very time restrained, and I know I've actually already gone over time. But if anybody has any questions, they're my contact details. So there's my work email there, and that's my Twitter handle. But I hope that it gives you a good idea of a general overview of what assistive technology looks like at Bridgend College. I know that a lot of the general FE colleges throughout Wales are beginning to introduce this role, which is amazing, and I'm personally thrilled because I love assistive technology. it's an amazing thing to have. So I will pass back now to Phil and stop rambling, and thank you very much everyone for listening.
Thanks, Kim. That's great. Due to the hassle at the start and Zoom not doing what it should do, I didn't give Kim a proper introduction, but I should really say we're really grateful to Kim for giving of her time in preparing the presentation and talking about what she does with great work at Bridgend. So thanks for that, Kim. It's really good to have you here. If you've got any questions for Kim, we're going to handle all the questions at the end, just to keep things flowing. So you might have questions for Kim or myself or for Kirsten, who's NatSpec's policy officer for Wales. I'm the manager and assistive technology lead of TechAbility, which provides assistive technology support to colleges right across the UK. So I'm going to move on now to talk about when you're looking for an assistive technologist, who do you want and what skills do you want them to have? So it's important, I think, to just look at this briefly, because you need to get the right person in place. There aren't that many, it's fair to say, people out there who call themselves assistive technologists, but it might be that you find the right person to move into that role. And this is what I feel is needed for this particular role. And it's thinking first about the people skills above the technology skills. You do want someone to have knowledge and a kind of technology leaning, that they'll be happy to work with technology, but they need the people skills. They need to be able to focus on the learner and not the technology. They need to be able to look at need, not just the latest technology and the things which are really fancy and have currently available. And it needs a balance between these two things, and that's the tricky thing for an assistive technologist, I think, is they need to know the technology, but they primarily need to be able to focus on the learner. And I'd use this phrase: they need to be able to explain the tech to non-techies. So as well as training the learners on this technology, they will also be training staff and supporting staff with rolling this out. So they need to be able to explain that in a way that's understandable to those different groups. But likewise, the other way, they also need to be able to explain the human need to the techies. So assistive technologists will interface with IT departments a lot to try and get things working and try and get things solved. So they need to be able to do that the other way as well, to say the reason we need this opening up or we need this available for all students is so that they've got access, and be able to explain that in a way the techies understand. So it's quite a specific role in that way. They also need to be a problem solver. They've got to be able to question, go away and do research, adapt technologies so that they meet the requirements of the learner, and then work on applying that. So come alongside the learner and help them develop the skills, and maybe think about combining technologies as well. So Kim talked about Chrome and Windows and having to be able to handle those two different platforms within the one college. They're a Chrome college, so primarily that will be it, but they need to have some Windows input as well. And that applies right across assistive technology, whether it's through hardware or through software. And then one thing I think is that an AT, an assistive technologist, needs to be a generalist. If they're too specialist, then they're not going to be able to know that wide range of technologies. What I do as an assistive technologist is that I'll know an awful lot about different technologies, but some of them I might only know what they do, and I won't know the in-depth usage of them. So to take up Kim's example of a visually impaired student using some screen reading software, which is highly complex, I wouldn't seek to deliver training to that student necessarily on that. I would deliver support, but if they needed some really in-depth training, I would refer them on, because I need to be a generalist, because I need to be able to encompass that wide range of students. They also need to be able to apply any relevant technology to remove barriers. So that means not just knowing about what's labeled as assistive technology, but knowing about the mainstream tech that's out there that could be used to remove the barrier. And this brings us back full circle to focusing on the learner, not on the technology. We're not assessing learners based on the technological requirements. We're assessing them based on some barriers that might be in their way to learning, or their learning and curriculum goals while they're at college. So I'll give you a link at the end of this webinar I'll post it in the chat for all the resources that we used during this session. And in a few days, the recording of this session will be linked from there too. And I'm just going to share in a second the job description and a person specification that you could use if you wanted to as an exemplar to give you a starting point if you're looking to employ an assistive technologist in your college. I have to say, though, it is just a starting point. It's kind of very neutral, and you will need to adapt it for your context. So specific policies and specific goals that you want an assistive technologist to meet will need to be put in there. But for some people have been telling us that they didn't know really where to start when they're putting together this kind of job description, because there's never been that role in a college before. And to remember, I'll just run through some key points in it in a second, but just to remember that most assistive technologists didn't have this as a career plan. I think I speak for Kim and myself and lots of other ATs out there. We didn't leave school or university and say, I want to be an AT. We found our way into the role. And while that is changing gradually through various courses and training courses, people will find their way in, and they might have those skill sets that we mentioned before, but see this as their ideal job. But on that note, it's important that when they find their way, if they find their way into the role, that their continuous professional development is supported. Things change so quickly in terms of technology that that person needs to have some capacity to be able to keep researching, keep upskilling, keep going to training. And as I mentioned, hopefully number one will change. There's various courses now that are developing out there, including the master's course at Dundee, that will train people to become assistive technologists or to formalize their experience. So bear with me, and I will just open this document for you, so I can just jump through it and show you some key points. Here we go. Zoom really isn't behaving today for me, so let's try and find it. Here we go. So this is the document of a person specification exemplar, and as you'll see, I've noted at the top there that this has to be adapted to your context. But this is a job description and a person specification, and they both have equal weight, I would say. So the job description really is based on the kind of work that Kim does, and we've also consulted with other assistive technologists who work in general further education colleges to make sure it meets their typical tasks for the job description. So you'll note in here that there is the need to be able to deliver training to staff as well as to learners. Kim mentioned in her presentation that the amount of accessibility tools that are built into Google that are built into Windows, and unless all staff know how to use those, then they're not going to be anywhere near as effective. So the role does involve supporting staff as well as supporting learners. Liaising with other teams around the learner, making sure that everybody feeds into that. And Kim's diagram is a great illustration of that, the amount of liaising an AT needs to do. And then here, this section, the general responsibilities would be something that needs to meet your college policies. But one example for this particular context that we probably all have in your policies is knowledge of the Welsh language standards and compliance under that. The person specification really covers in more detail what I've just been talking about, that person has technology skills. They can use mainstream technology such as Office, Google Drive, etc., whatever is relevant to your setting. But also that they're a problem solver, that they have previous experience of supporting individuals with disabilities or individuals in learning. I would say there's desirable qualities as well. Ideally, that person should have or should be willing to work towards a basic teaching award. So something which gives them the skills or proves that they've got the skills to be able to train people in a formal manner and in a semi-formal manner. Ideally, I guess for your context, it's about having experience of working in a post-16 education environment. These are desirable, and knowledge of presenting to a wide range of audiences. Because again, coming back to Kim's diagram, it might be that at 9 o'clock in the morning, they're meeting with a learner and delivering some training on an assistive technology, but in the afternoon, they have to give a presentation to leadership in the college as to why there's a funding requirement for specific assistive technology. So that wide experience is good, but that I've put those in desirable because I think people can develop those skills on the job, and they're not necessarily essential. So that person spec and job description is available in the link that I will post in the chat just now. There are a range of resources in there too, and some links to some free webinars and some training from TechAbility, which might help support your current role, but also might help support an assistive technologist as they're moving in to the job. But they all will be available on this link, ATs in Welsh Colleges. I'll make sure I post that in the chat. And as I say, the recording will be there too. So that was quite a fast rattle through the AT role, but I wanted to make sure that we leave time for any questions for Kim or myself, or indeed for Kirsten. So please feel free to post those in the chat, or if you want to, you could raise your hands and we'll make sure you have the mic to ask that question. So fire away if you have any questions for any of us. Okay, sorry, I'm just scrolling back through the chat to see if there's anything. Oh, stunned everyone to silence.
Okay,
Kirsten, did you have something to say?
Please, Phil. I was just wondering, first of all, thank you. That was a wealth of really useful information. So I'm wondering if colleagues present were wanting to proceed with advertising for an AT, and they've got your exemplar, but would you be happy just to have a look at their draft job description?
Yes, by all means. If people wanted to then run that past us, that's no problem at all. Obviously, I don't see any problem if I'm mainly confident, 90% confident in the job description we've produced. So if you're adding to that, but if you want to run it past us, that's fine, and the contacts will be there at the end of the webinar too.
I just wanted to add as well, I know that a few of the colleges, particularly in South Wales, have now put an AT in place, but if any colleges want to get in touch for any sort of support that Bridgend can offer, that just to shoot me an email, I'd be happy.
That's great, Kim, thanks for that.
Okay.
Right, okay, I would just put up these contacts again to make sure that people have them in case they want to get in touch after this. As I said, that the resources will all be available on that link, that bit.ly link that I've put in bit.ly/ATs in Welsh Colleges. And all the information will be there, and feel free to get in touch after that if you have any burning questions. We're getting some good feedback about people saying it's made a lot of things clearer, so that's really useful feedback. Thanks for that, David. And if you want more information on how NatSpec can support your work with learners with ALN, then come to the NatSpec site, natspec.org.uk, and we can hopefully support you with that. Okay, so I think we'll call it to a close there. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks again to Kim for putting so much time into this session. And thanks, Kirsten. We'll just sit here for a second in case anyone comes up with a question, but we will leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Diolch.